Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Friday, November 19th. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Michigan State game is in one day, the game against Michigan in 8 days. On yesterday's show, we had a very uplifting conversation with Ross Fulton about the Buckeyes' big offensive day against Purdue. Ross is back today. We're going to be talking about the defense. It's not quite as uplifting, but it should be just as informative. So, Ross, thanks for joining me.
Good to be here, Tom.
So the passing game was obviously where Purdue picked up most of their yardage on Saturday and most of their points. But I was pretty surprised by how well they were able to run the ball. They had averaged less than 3 yards a carry against every team they played all year, except for UConn, which basically doesn't count. And then they got more or less 4.8 yards per carry against the Buckeyes. So what was Ohio State doing that let them run the ball so much better than they had at any point in the season?
Yeah, I mean, in a word, they're essentially playing like prevent, bend but don't break defense, especially when they got a lead. It morphed a little bit after the first quarter. Ohio State was playing essentially coverages that they normally would only use on third and long, basically like on first down. And so, we're talking like cover two, 8-man drop, like, cover three with only 3 defenders rushing. So a lot of times they were down a man in the box to begin with. And then they were having the linebackers essentially freeze and to play pass first. So instead of coming down into their run fits, they were basically holding their position, whether that was, to play RPO or to make sure that they were in their pass drop spots. And so that was creating some distance between the first and second levels, and basically allowing Purdue to gain yards, which they didn't create any explosive runs, but as you said, it let them stay ahead of schedule.
And, it sounds like that was more or less, you always hear about teams playing Mike Leach and other air raid teams and just doing like the rush 3, drop 8 and make them like move the ball methodically down the field. Was that essentially what Ohio State was doing? Were they basically playing the air raid type defense where, Mike Leach teams always average like huge numbers of yards per carry, but they don't want to run the ball, so they don't do it that much? Was that essentially what that was last weekend?
Basically, yeah. I mean, it was essentially like, we know we can tighten this down if we need to. And I think, I can't put myself in their minds, but I think there's on the last drive, maybe some frustration with letting them do that because Ohio State did tighten down and had, like multiple run stuffs, for like 0 or negative yardage. And so I think, maybe in hindsight, I think Ryan did kind of alluded to this, like maybe in hindsight, they would have changed what they did and been like a little bit more aggressive and forced Purdue to be one-dimensional. But it was essentially like, we're not going to let David Bell beat us over the top. We're going to force them to keep, moving the ball down the field with quick game passes. And, Purdue did do that, which was aided by – the problem was Ohio State did give up explosive pass plays doing it. So it wasn't, it would have been one thing if it was like only like small chunks, but they hit a bunch of 20-plus yarders. But that was essentially the concept that they were using.
So, but with Ohio State playing the pass first, I mean, Purdue was still able to move the ball pretty consistently through the air. It wasn't like they just locked down the passing game and they were only able to run. So, what were they doing to, I mean, you wrote this week about them using like quick hitters to get the ball out and kind of negate the chance for the pass rush to get there. Was, how big was that, and what did that do, and why were they able to take advantage of Ohio State there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was the vast majority of what they did. I mean, we're talking, snap it to the quarterback in the shotgun, he takes one step and the ball's out. I mean, it's just going to be really hard to ever get a pass rush if they're doing that. Even when they were throwing vertically, it was like essentially like a quick fade. It's not like, hey, not like what Ohio State does. And it's like, hey, we're going to get Chris Olave 50 some yards down the field off of play action. It's pretty much the opposite. And so, there's only so much you can do pass rush wise, which probably played into their desire to drop 8 quite a bit. But, was able to do it because there just were holes in the Ohio State zone, especially like in the underneath flats. And so they could just keep taking advantage of those small gains. And then, that gave them the opportunity when it presented itself to push the ball downfield at times.
We talked a lot earlier in the year about what teams are doing against Ohio State, Minnesota and Oregon and even Tulsa, when they were really, really heavy in those single high looks, the cover 1, cover 3, but also that, hey, there are route combinations that will beat any coverage. There is not one magical coverage that will stop everything. So Ohio State was playing a decent amount of cover 2 on Saturday. We've spent a lot of time talking about what beats cover 1 and cover 3 this fall. So let's talk about what was beating cover 2 on Saturday. What was Purdue doing to move the ball against that type of coverage?
Yeah, there are so many pass plays. You got good examples of what works against every coverage from Purdue against Ohio State. But so when Ohio State was playing cover 3, it was a lot of that underneath flat stuff as I described. When they played cover 2, that was actually when Purdue created more of their explosive plays on the field, because I think we've talked about this before, but Ohio State, especially like in cover 2 and cover 3, they spot drop. And so like that's the traditional way of playing zone coverage. You literally, hey, you have the underneath, curl flat zone, and you literally, by the term, you drop there and you keep your eyes on the quarterback and you try to move. That has basically gone by the wayside for the most part in college football. Teams pattern match or man match, which essentially, hey, yes, you have this zone, but like within that zone, you're going to play man coverage. And the reason people do that is because what you saw on Saturday. So like if you're playing cover 2, if you think about it, you got 2 deep defenders. If a team runs 3 vertical routes, they have a 3-on-2 advantage. And like there's no world where you can deal with that except if you have the underneath defenders carry them vertically, because the concept being like, well, if the routes are doing that, then we don't need all these guys in the underneath coverage. So like on that first touchdown, you could see on the television replay, like Ronnie Hickman to the boundary had to deal with 2 vertical routes on his own, because you had the corner and the will linebacker basically just sitting there, derisively call it guarding grass, because there's no one there. And so, to deal with that, like what most teams do is like they have the will linebacker carry like the number 2 or inside receiver vertically as well. So then the safety can now pick up the outside guy. And so, you saw several big plays where basically, the classic way to attack cover 2 is run like a smash concept. And so I showed them an article, and like by smash, I just mean like the inside receiver runs a corner route and the outside receiver runs a hitch. So like the cover 2 corner sits on the hitch, then the corner route can beat the safety to the outside. And so, you just saw stuff like that they were able to create explosive gains. And so to me, like what's always going to hold back Ohio State coverage wise is the spot dropping. Like it's always going to be an issue. They've helped themselves by the fact they now at least mix up coverages a lot more. So like, Ryan Day talked about it in his radio show yesterday, like they're at least forcing quarterbacks to go to like their 3rd or 4th read, because you don't automatically know like, hey, I'm dropping back, I've got cover 3, boom. And that lets them get pressure. But, it's still going to be a hindrance. That's why I like when they play cover 4, because they at least put the corners in man and pattern match it a little bit. And like, or the cover 3 pressures, because you're creating pressure. And that's like why I think that, Purdue is sort of a one-off, because it was basically playing 7-on-7 a lot. And like, and you got to give like Purdue's quarterback Aiden O'Connell credit. Like he found the matchups and quickly got the ball out, or just diagnosed the coverage and quickly got the ball out. So it's a long-winded way of saying that like that pretty much exposed the limitations in Ohio State's zone schemes.
So if Ohio State wanted to fix those zone schemes, and, you talked about the fact that was sort of a one-off because they don't have a ton of, similar teams similar to Purdue coming up the next couple of weeks. But, is that something that they could install during bowl practice, or is that something that's pattern matching? If you're used to spot drop, installing an entire pattern matching thing is, A, completely impossible, or B, asking for trouble because it's not really enough time during bowl practice. Is that something they could do before they would play a more pass heavy team in the playoff potentially?
I don't think so. I mean, I think so. They've, as I've said, they've gone beyond what I thought they could do in season, right? Like they're well beyond that. So they've pushed it. So like, when they run cover 4 concepts, you see them doing some pattern matching. As I said, like, they're not doing like super complicated things necessarily, but they are doing it. And like, even when they're in cover 3, they're at least doing like some route recognition where like they're going to carry a crosser across the field, for instance, like the safety will stay with them as opposed to just like letting them go. But I think for them, and like, when you say more pass happy teams, like it kind of doesn't exist. Like, not like Purdue, right?
Mhm.
I mean, Alabama's maybe like the closest example. And like we saw what the RPOs did to Ohio State last year with Alabama. But like, I think Ohio State's answer to that is more likely going to be what they did against Penn State, who's super RPO happy as well. And like, they use basically a ton of like cover three pressure. So you're at least like changing muddying the reads for the quarterback as to like, is if the guy's blitzing, he's no longer in conflict, right? And now the
Mhm.
quarterback doesn't necessarily know where the person coming into that zone is from. So I think, obviously the next couple of weeks and even at Georgia are, I mean, you got to stop the run first and foremost. And so that changes the game a little bit compared to what they were doing on Saturday.
So during the game on Saturday, I was watching and just kind of wondering how much of this is just Ohio State just trying to keep everything in front of them and not give up the big play in the passing game, especially once they had a big lead. You're up 35-7 or whatever it was in the second quarter. At that point, if Purdue's going to dink and dunk down the field, they're not going to have enough time because they're also not seemingly able to stop the Ohio State offense. So how much of that was just keep everything in front of you, don't give up the big play, and that was part of what they were giving up versus, was it not that they were trying to give up a bunch of short completions, but, was that sort of a byproduct of what they were doing for that reason or no?
I think so. I mean, just because you can compare it to just that early in the game, it was a little bit different. And then on the last drive, I think they were getting frustrated. So it was a little bit different. I think they would have been a little bit more assertive, more cover four, more man coverage, take away the run, force, Purdue into third and long situations and take your chances. I mean, I just, it's very rare that you see Ohio State play. I mean, for them, it's prevent, like playing cover five, which is just cover two with all man underneath. Like, they just don't run that on first down for the reason I showed in my article. Like, your linebackers are turned in coverage and you can't play the run. So, those are, I can't imagine we'll ever see them play back coverage again, for instance, on like 1st and 10. So I do think a big chunk of it was just that they were just basically letting Purdue tread water because the Ohio State offense was basically in a name your score situation. Like, they could have scored every drive if they wanted to. And so it was just, I think, kind of trying to play complementary football.
So we've talked about this a little bit, but I just want to kind of go into a little more depth here. Purdue was, you wrote and have talked about the fact it's a little bit of a one-off as far as an opposing offense, that they're not, this is not, you're not, Michigan State is not going to just be able to walk in and do the exact same thing that Purdue does, because that's not the kind of offense they do. I mean, is there another team that Ohio State is going to face this year, at least next 3 weeks, and then maybe even in terms of playoff teams, even like potential playoff teams? Is there anyone that you think could try and do the same kind of basic stuff that Purdue is doing and with the same kind of offense that Purdue is running? Or is it just kind of like, well, that didn't look great, but it doesn't necessarily matter because they're not really playing another team like that later this year?
I think yes and no. I mean, I agree it didn't look great. I think it has some implications. I mean, I think that teams will try to throw it on early downs and stay ahead of schedule against them. And, I think right. This is a hard one to talk about because I think we have to it depends on what your expectations are, right? Like, they're not gonna be able to perform at the level of Georgia, Wisconsin, Penn State's defense, Michigan's defense. I mean, I think they are, they have gotten themselves an SP plus from literally 41st after Oregon up to they're like 13th or 14th. So that's a big jump. And they've had several games where they've played well. I think they match up better against, but to your question, like, if Michigan State or Michigan tries to do that all the time, then I think you take that trade-off because now they're playing left-handed essentially. And like, Kenneth Walker's not a part of the game, or Michigan's run game is not a part of the game. Like, you'd rather have the ball in their quarterback's hands trying to move it all the time as opposed to being who they are. So, and that's kind of the concept of the Ohio State defense generally too, is, in a big picture, like, they want to stop the run and force teams to throw. And so they'll give some of that stuff up. And so, the biggest thing is going to be stopping the run. And you can't let teams average what Purdue averaged, obviously, or then they're really going to be in trouble.
We'll see how they do against Kenneth Walker this weekend in terms of. I sounds like they'll probably be a little more run focused this week. Understandably, turns out when you play a Heisman contender running back, you're probably going to spend a little more time thinking about the run than when you're playing a team that can't run for 3 yards a carry against anyone else. So that makes sense. There's my crazy prediction for this weekend. Ross, thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Tom. Have a good one.
Well, and you can find all of Ross's coverage at BuckeyeScoop.com. He had 2 fantastic articles this week. Also, do follow him on Twitter. He's at Ross R. Fulton. He is a fantastic follow on Twitter because he will have his thoughts. He will also interact with other people that do the X's and O's thing that follow other teams. You will learn an awful lot. And if you look at my timeline, you will see an awful lot of me retweeting Ross Fulton because I went, oh, that's interesting, and thought I'd share it with the world. So give Ross a follow on Twitter. And do check out his work at BuckeyeScoop.com as well. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.